Now, a couple of months back, I did a video where I debunked Daniel Priestley, the millionaire entrepreneur accelerator, which isn't a real job anyway, who debated Gary Stevenson on the Star of a CEO podcast. He is using every single ounce of clout that he can squeeze out of the damp cloth that is the reaction to that video on Star of a CEO to try and spread his message and to try and get media appearances to build his brand. Because he relies on having a big brand because that's how he reaches people to do business with them. LBC invited him on to take calls from the public with Tom Swarbrick presenting. I'm very interested to see how this goes. Of course, plenty of his points we'll have already covered in the last video, but I will cover those again should they come up. Let's have a watch.
So if tax rises are coming and the pressure is on Labour to introduce a wealth tax, what do the millionaires think? This is your opportunity on LBC to meet the millionaire. Daniel Priestley is an entrepreneur, best-selling author and international speaker. Started with nothing and built successful multi-million-dollar businesses. Thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio and welcome back to LBC.
Pleasure to be here.
Let's start with that question of where this tax rise, because Labour are going to have to put taxes up, where this tax rise is going to fall, and your, I guess, suggestion of why it shouldn't be you.
Well, I think we should collect as many taxes as we possibly can. The country needs to run on taxes and we have to have public services and all of those sorts of things.
That's an interesting change in position. Before he said that taxation broadly of any reason was bad for the economy. And now he's saying we should be collecting all the taxes that we can. That's very strange of him to say so. That's a bit of a heel turn. Now that he's speaking to a broader audience rather than just his own audience.
The problem that we have at the moment is that we live in a very digital environment. The millionaires are making money online. 95% of the assets of publicly listed companies are digital assets now, so they're intangible. They're databases and they're algorithms and media content libraries and all of those sorts of things. These are businesses that can be run from anywhere. So
we're not just talking about publicly traded businesses that we want to tax. We also want to tax individuals. It's about the stock portfolio of individuals and of limited liability companies as well as that. Like, of course, corporation tax is one thing, but you don't tax the assets that companies own. You tax the assets that people own, and they would have to be domiciled in the UK for us to tax the assets that they have as part of their net worth. He is talking about the assets held digitally by publicly traded companies. When we don't want to tax those, if you're a UK domiciled taxpayer and you have XYZ amount of stock assets of a company, regardless of what those assets are owned by that company itself, you would then pay a wealth tax if your wealth is over £10 million at a rate of 1% or of 2% over £1 billion.
the issue is that many of the millionaires already have 2 passports, they already have multiple residences, they already spend much of their time globetrotting around the world, so they're very comfortable with the idea of having a home base somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So if a country becomes unpopular or hostile to wealth, then unfortunately it's just not that hard to run the business from anywhere in the world.
Well, the evidence would have to be that they would definitely leave if you did that. And again, we don't really have much evidence of people leaving for tax reasons at the moment. Just that study that he quoted that one time that used people's locations on LinkedIn and then extrapolated that outwards as if that was actually a reasonable thing to do in terms of study methodology. And then second of all, if you really, really care about capital flight, just do an exit tax on people's assets if they leave. That's what Switzerland does.
The question is what we mean by hostile and actually what we mean by wealth. Because the suggestion that and the lobbying of government that is going on is to say for people with assets over 10 million, they should pay an extra 2%.
So there's a few issues with that, which is how do you calculate it? Because if I raise some money for a new venture and we raise money at a 10 million valuation, do I now have a 10 million asset, or do we understand that that's just a fictitious valuation in terms of it's not realized? The word wealth is a really clever word for the word unrealized gains. So if I have properties that I bought years ago and you revalue those properties at whatever you value them at, on paper, in theory, there's a particular level of wealth that has been accumulated. But if you don't sell those, if you haven't sold those assets, it's an unrealized gain.
The whole point of the tax is to make you sell those assets. If you hold £10 million worth of property, or they'll have to be over 10 million because you get taxed on a wealth tax at your wealth above that value, not on all of that value once you pass that threshold. That's how marginal rates work. the argument is that if you own, say, £15 million of property, you would have to sell some of that to pay the 1% tax on the 5 million above the 10 million threshold. The whole point is to get you to realise the gains by forcing you to sell. That's literally the whole point, to try and ensure that the assets of society are equitably distributed throughout the country, throughout the people, rather than held in the hands of a very small and very, very wealthy elite. That's the whole point of that. When you talk about unrealized gains, that's the difference in the value at purchase at when it was sold, right? So if you buy a house at £1 million and then 10 years later it's worth £2 million, right? The capital gains would be on the £1 million difference, because that's how much extra you've earned from the appreciating value of that capital. The gain in the capital that's being taxed, hence capital gains tax, right? An unrealized capital gains tax, which is what the Biden administration were floating just before the 2022 midterms, I believe it was going to tax people on the increased value of those assets based upon the original purchase value, i.e. taxing the capital gain that hasn't been realised as you haven't sold the asset. That's not the same as a wealth tax, because the wealth tax is upon the entire estate. You tax upon the value of the entire estate, not just the increase in value that you've accrued since you purchased the asset at its original price, right? That's the difference between an unrealised capital gains tax and a wealth tax.
So ultimately, a lot of the wealth of a nation or wealth of the UK is the theoretical value of the companies. So, for example, you take a massive company like Tesla. If a small number of people on any given day buy some shares in Tesla, they extrapolate that tiny little purchase to the whole value of the company, but it doesn't mean that you could sell the whole company for that amount. So the wealth is just a weird calculation that doesn't mean anything until you actually liquidate it. So coming up with this idea that you have to pay two.
But again, he's trying to say that we're going to be taxing the company's value with a wealth tax. No, the actual companies themselves would pay corporation tax, and that's on their profit and loss. That's on how much profit they make, not on the value of the actual company itself. It is individuals that we would tax with a wealth tax. It is the individuals themselves, i.e. the owners of the shares, who wouldn't own the whole of the company unless it was privately owned rather than publicly traded, which is not what he's talking about. He's talking about publicly traded companies, which are owned by myriad numbers of people. Most people hedge when they buy shares. So their overall net worth is the broad amount of shares of multiple different companies that they own, which would even out to a normal amount once you actually calculate it. And that's what's getting taxed by a wealth tax, not the company Tesla. No one is taxing Tesla as a company, apart from on their profit and loss.
2% of an unrealized gain makes it incredibly unworkable. How are you going to do that with a fluctuating value that goes up and
Who
down?
decides the value of the house price or whatever it might be?
Well, or the company price on what given day? Like, what given day do you calculate it? Is that price deflated by the tax in itself? So there's all of these issues. How do you calculate it? Do the companies have to go into debt to pay it? And then once you start exploring those questions, you just simply come to the conclusion it's easier to take your company offshore.
So if the reality is that the state is going to have more money to pay for the things that the state needs to pay for, and it is going to have to come from somewhere. You say not you. I, as a non-millionaire, say not me, and my listeners who are taxed to high heaven say not them. Where's it going to come from?
Well, just first of all,
we're being sort of tax NIMBYs.
Yeah, just first of all, this. The UK government now spends 45% of GDP through the government. Now, that's a historical massive high point since World War II.
Yes, and this is because we have an ageing society, and therefore the public realm requires higher spending to be able to support that retired demographic who use the NHS more, who use more social services, who require a state pension. And it's good that we do that. But if we're going to do this, we want to continue this system, which we should do, it will require a bigger tax base. This is happening across the Western world. All of the developed economies across the Western Europe and the United States, all of these countries are seeing overall increases in public spending because they're all going through the same demographic changes because of advances in healthcare technology that have caused our elderly to live much longer. They require more care, they require more healthcare treatment, and they require more pension expenditure. All of the countries are dealing with this demographic thing. And all of these countries are increasing their taxation to cover it. Apart from Norway, they don't need to, because in Norway they have a massive pension fund funded by their oil, which was nationalised and not sold off like they were in the UK and the North Sea. Fun fact, the Norwegian pension fund is so big, it owns 1.5% of all assets in the world. Which is crazy to think about.
So if you want to know where all the money is in a massive government that we haven't seen the size of this government since World War II. 45% of the economy, almost half the economy, is government spending now.
And I hate this idea that somehow large government spending means a big government. Because it's not actually a big government. The government doesn't own many assets. The government spends a lot of money because it taxes a lot of money and has a lot of bonds that it issues because of how large the economy is. It's £1 trillion economy. It's the 6th biggest economy in the world. But that's because of the amount of inflows of capital into the country and the financial sector. Broadly, the fact that we've been growing for a very long time, being the beneficiary of a lot of imperial exploitation that has increased the overall value of the country in terms of the monetary value of the country's economy more broadly. But in terms of the size of the government itself, they don't own much anymore. At least when you look at, as I said, Norway, for example, they own this huge sovereign wealth fund to use as its pension part. And that is mostly formed of the fact that they own their oil deposits. 70% of Equinor, the oil drilling company in Norway, is owned by their state. Countries in Scandinavia are very similar. The green energy sector broadly operated by a state-owned company in Denmark. Same with Sweden. There's a lot more state ownership in these countries, which they do have big governments. Because it's not just a government that spends a lot, it's a government that owns a lot. Like, people talk about the difference between socialism and capitalism broadly, and whilst there are certain ways you can define these things, socialism broadly, as far as I understand it, and as far as I would personally describe it myself, is the social ownership of capital. It's the capital ownership that's important, because it's the capital that drives the ability to make profit. If the private sector owns capital, the beneficiaries of that are the private individuals. That's what funnels wealth upward. If you have social ownership of capital, like they do with the oil in Norway, this is spread around for the benefit of everybody. And it is because they have more social ownership of capital, they have better and fairer societies. Whereas because we have more private ownership of capital, the government taxes and spends a lot, but the people and the government are very, very asset poor. And why all our assets owned by rich people, private equity companies, offshore companies, and, in lots of cases, foreign governments. We're literally having to buy back a bunch of stuff that we own off of foreign governments. Électricité de France, the state-owned energy company, is one of our suppliers, right? Our economy is made up of companies owned by other people's governments. Therefore, that's the social ownership of capital in Germany and France, which our bills are going to fund their welfare states. So we don't have a big government. We have a high-spending government. But taxing and spending does not socialism make.
A few years ago, the government spent 650 to 700 billion a year. Now we spend 1.3 trillion a year. So have things gotten twice as good? They doubled their budget. Have they gotten twice as good at spending money? Or perhaps, I mean, God, unthinkable, but maybe the government needs to be better at spending money. Maybe they need.
Well, no, they just have to spend more money because there are more things that the public purse requires spending on. Again, he doesn't seem to understand the concept of inflation or economic growth. Or well, the government used to spend less, but now it spends more. The economy is bigger, dum-dum. We have increased overall taxation as a percentage of the economy. The overall spending as a percentage of GDP has gone up. But why not talk about it in GDP terms? And there would actually be a comparative analysis of how different it is over time. Whereas you say, oh, we're spending this much in nominal terms. Well, that is irrelevant when you look at the actual percentage of the economy that's being spent. Are you surprised, chat, that this finance bro doesn't actually understand macroeconomics? What a surprise.
Need to go from 1.3 trillion to 1.1 trillion.
Well, that's cuts, isn't it? That's cuts in government spending. So where's that going to fall? NHS?
Well, I don't know.
Pensions?
We just spent
schools.
20 billion giving away some islands. We just spent 20 billion on some solar panels made in China while we're all.
But the solar panels we spend the money on make a return. You are literally a businessman. You know how return on investment works. The only reason that we could buy solar panels by issuing bonds is because the profit on those assets that we are purchasing with those bonds provide a return greater than the interest payment on those bonds. That's literally the whole point of spending money to make money. You are literally a businessman. You should know this.
also simultaneously dimming the sun. Like there are plenty of things the government does that are just plain stupid. 11% of working age people are getting disability benefits now because they're too sick to work. Historically, that was 2% of the population was too sick to work. Even after World War II, 2% of people couldn't work, were too sick to work. We now have 11% of working age people too sick to work.
Have you considered that we just went through a pandemic? We literally went through a mass disabling event.
So maybe we need to look at, do we give BMWs to people who have mobility issues?
He's literally spreading the Motability conspiracy theory that we're giving free BMWs to people. No. You have to pay for the BMWs if they go through Motability, and they are literally spending their existing mobility payment as part of disability on Motability. They don't get free BMWs. It's coming out of the money they would otherwise be spending on reasonable adjustments to deal with their disability. Stop talking about shit that you don't have a clue about, Daniel. Jesus Christ, what, we're 5 minutes in? Got 20 minutes of this to go, by the way, chat.
Issues, because at the moment we give people a new BMW if they say the right thing over the phone.
I'm sure that this is an accurate representation of the disability system.
That's a
These are real things, by the way.
It is a real thing, but it's a glib description of what is at times a quite difficult set of circumstances for people to navigate to get the mobility support through PIP and DLA.
I'm not saying you don't give support. I'm just saying when a country is flat growth, when the government is 45% of the UK economy, when the government has gone from 700 billion spending to 1.3 trillion spending, maybe there are some creative solutions. I mean, if I had a business that was flat, I wouldn't be giving everyone brand new BMWs. Maybe I'd be looking at second.
Still going after this. And again, like, no one's getting free BMWs. The mobility payment from PIP is the same, regardless of what you spend that money on for Motability. You don't get any more money to get a BMW. And you know that that's true because you have to pay a surcharge if you want the BMW, which on a 3-year lease is essentially the same as if you were just buying a BMW anyway. No one, I repeat, nobody is getting free BMWs. They get leased for 3 years, they go back to Motability, Motability sells them on the private market because most people buy second-hand cars in this country. It's not a difficult paradigm, but of course, why would I expect someone on the right to do a basic level of research on the things that they spout completely uninformed on LBC? What it is, to be a right-winger, you just have to be an ignorant, stupid person, right? All it takes to be a right-wing grifter in this economy is being performatively ignorant and performatively stupid. But I'm sure, right? I'm sure if we stop the disabled, again, who have no work requirement for claiming Motability, if we stop them from having access to mobility aids, I'm sure they'll be more likely to work, won't they, Daniel, rather than less? Maybe they will get more likely to get into work if they're stuck at home because they don't have access to a mobility aid to get them out of the fucking house. Jesus Christ.
Hand BMWs.
0345 6060 973 is the number. Daniel is here until 5 to take some questions and calls on this issue. Jason's in Maida Vale to kick us off. Jason.
Hello there, thanks. Hi, Daniel. Just wanted to ask you, you sort of touched on this just now, but everything seems to be in spiral, and everyone who is not a millionaire is paying a lot of tax. Where do you expect the money to come from? You just hinted that you think governments need to be smarter at spending their money. But is it really that simple?
There's two things.
And of course it's not, because we were told that we could just cut government spending through efficiency savings throughout the entirety of the coalition government, and there wouldn't be any reduction in service provision. But the reality is that our public realm is already pretty efficient. The NHS is one of the most efficient healthcare services in the world. It just can't function properly if it gets stripped of funding, and all of those efficiency savings actually created a drop in service provision that we were told wouldn't happen. Surprise, surprise.
I think it needs to happen. Number one is government needs to make cuts. They are too big, they're too inefficient. Number two, we need to get the UK growing again. The UK is not growing. We are going through a digital revolution right now where the rest of the world has discovered that the entire global economy needs to transform around new technology like AI. We are going through a global boom in innovation where China, USA, they're discovering that these new tools and technologies can attract investment, they can create jobs, they can create growth.
Okay, you say China is spending money on innovation. I wonder which part of the Chinese economy is doing the R&D spending for it. You know, the country where 40% of countries are state-owned? The communist country, the country that is literally run by the Chinese Communist Party. Most of the technological innovation, especially in technology, especially in the online realm, came out of American government spending. It just happens that since they stripped it back in a post-Reagan era, all that technological innovation is now being done in China, where they actually have government investment. You are literally saying the government should spend less money, and comparing them to two countries who have previously done very, very well in having state investment in innovation. Clueless. He's just totally clueless. And even then, he says the government should do cuts, whilst not understanding that the primary form of economic growth that we have had in the West since the Second World War has been through demand-side economics, has been through demand-side economic policy. If you cut government spending, then you actually reduce demand in the economy. We need to stimulate aggregate demand so that the supply side meets that new demand. That's Keynesianism. Basic Keynesianism, the progenitor of the society that we have in the West today.
The UK literally has one of the leading educational infrastructures for AI. We have some of the best universities. We have some of the best infrastructure in London. We have an amazing time zone. We have a city that people love living in. We could have special economic zones that would attract people back here. The biggest issue that we have right now, I've got all of these entrepreneurial friends of mine who are the types of people making $500,000 to $1 million a year profit from their business, and they just pick up and they go to Dubai. And every single time, let's say someone who's making $1 million a year picks up and goes to Dubai or goes to the USA or goes to Singapore, every time they leave, this country loses about £450,000 worth of tax. You're going to need,
He doesn't understand marginal tax rates. He said a millionaire contributes £450,000 of tax. And that is essentially a calculation of the higher rate of tax being paid on £1 million at 45%. That's not how marginal tax rates work, Daniel. You only get taxed 45% on money you earn above a certain threshold, not the entire million. And on top of this, that's only if you earn £1 million of PAYE income, not if you make money on capital gains or if you pay yourself through dividends that are both taxed at a lower rate than PAYE income. If you are somebody who owns a company, you do not pay yourself PAYE outside of what would be charged at 22% tax rate, because the tax rate on the capital gains or the dividends payments that you could pay out to yourself as an owner of the business is charged at a lower rate. And even then, that's if you actually pay yourself in £1 million worth of money into your bank account and not pay yourself in shares that you don't pay dividends on, that you use to have a higher net worth without having a higher level of actual income. He doesn't even understand the basics of how tax is paid, and he's trying to lecture both the LBC audience and Tom Swarbrick about tax policy. I swear down, right? Why do we give these people a platform? Why do we give these people a platform?
Theoretically, you only need...
Daniel, sorry, but why are they leaving? But why are they leaving?
The tax burden is so high. 1% of people are paying 30% of taxes. 10% of people are paying 60% of taxes.
And again, this is all PAYE, not on capital gains, not on dividends. It is the top earners who pay this, and most of these people are not the economically mobile millionaires that he's talking about here. Most of the taxes are getting paid by high-earning middle-class people. Someone who earns £150,000 a year, which is a great deal of money. Like, these are not poor people, these are not middle-income people, these are rich people, but they're not the super rich. They are not high asset owners. It's really important to understand that he is trying to propagandize to people who think we should tax the wealthy more, that because there are high earners who get taxed a lot, we shouldn't tax wealth. And wealth and earnings are totally different things, and that is the deliberate tactic that the rich try and do to turn upper middle class people against the poor for wanting higher taxes on wealth, when in reality, both high earners and low earners would benefit if we taxed the wealthy more, i.e. the super rich, people with £1 million, £10 million worth of assets, not income yearly.
Okay, but they're making hundreds of millions of pounds in revenue.
I hate to say it, but people just look out for... The truth is that people are people, and they look out for their best interests. So if you're an entrepreneur...
I make 50 grand in revenue. I'm not picking up and leaving.
Well, plenty of people are who are making 50 grand are leaving. There are teachers who are going to Dubai. Yeah. There are plumbers who are going to Dubai. There are dentists who are going to Dubai. There are actually plenty of people on 50 grand a year who like to pick up and go somewhere else at the moment because they do keep more of their money. I'm not.
Well, then why are we still seeing economic growth and business investment and FDI and wealthy people who don't leave Denmark or Norway, where they have higher taxes than we do on personal tax rates, and in Norway they have a wealth tax as well? Why are they not leaving there? There is so little evidence for this capital flight that he claims exists. And again, we can just do an exit tax.
Not saying that it's the right thing to do, but I'm saying people, one of the most sure factors in any economy, as predictable as gravity, is that people make the decisions based on the best interests of their own family before they think about the country.
This is a very neoliberal way of looking at it. I mean, people have been taught to think this way in a neoliberal world post-Thatcher, to think that greed is good and they should always look out for number one, but that wasn't always the case. We certainly had a far more cohesive view of what is good for society rather than the individual in the post-war period, rather than we have since Thatcher. This is really a societal attitude. Obsidian in chat asks, is Priestley on commission for Dubai? I mean, what he is in commission for is for creating the same society as Dubai in the United Kingdom. All of these rich people who talk about mobile millionaires moving to Dubai say so because they want to turn the UK into Dubai, which is a slave state. Dubai is a slave state. It is a state with a fabulously wealthy, internationally mobile cabal of rich people at the top and an overexploited underclass of migrant slaves at the bottom who live in slums. The reason why they're able to do what they do is because they have slaves who do the work, and they have a cabal of incredibly wealthy monsters at the top of society who benefit from the work that they do. And of course, oil. When in reality, you want to look at the country that has the best living standards for normal people. It's all the Scandinavian countries. It is all the countries with better workers' rights, higher levels of taxation. Those are the countries where it is the best to live as a normal person. I wonder why.
Jason.
Yeah. I think what you're saying actually hits the nail on the head. The problem is I mean, you're making it sound like it's people's concern about their family. I think it's greed. Someone doesn't like earning £8 when they were earning £10 last year. And when it's 800 million from a billion, I don't think that's a sum that you're allowed to whine about.
I don't think anyone's whining.
We're not talking about a teacher.
Yeah,
we're not talking about a teacher that's earning 10k less. We're talking about someone who's earning, I don't know, 200 million less.
And you get teachers who are also going to these places to pay less,
Sure.
to have a better lifestyle, right? So that happens.
Sure.
But when you talk about entrepreneurs mostly are focused on opportunity. And if a country goes flat and if a country goes into decline, then the opportunity dries up and the entrepreneur ecosystem dries up. And then it's like a magnet for the entrepreneurs to go wherever the capital is, to go wherever the growth is, to go wherever the talent is.
Well, he says this, but in his little study that he'd drawn last time we watched, the only country which had more capital flight than the UK was China. That was the only country that was worse than Britain for this exodus of millionaires, right? But he claims it's the countries with the most growth that they go to. China's one of the fastest growing economies in the world. China is the second biggest economy in the world. So that doesn't make sense from the evidence that he has previously presented, when people apparently are leaving China as millionaires, but China is still growing. And again, because they didn't just sell off all of their assets to the rich, and a lot of it is still held by the state for the benefits of everybody.
Tools, the technologies, the people. So entrepreneurs are like a little flock of birds, and they want to flock around all the other entrepreneurs. So do you know, when I arrived here in 2005-06, London was the place. That was the place to be. Everyone was coming from all over the world to be in London, and that was the place for entrepreneurs to arrive. We want to get back to that. We want to get back to the UK being centre of the world for entrepreneurship.
Jason,
I mean, I just want at the centre of the world for high living standards, so we should copy the countries that have the highest living standards, which are the Scandinavian states. It's not difficult.
appreciate the call. Thank you very much indeed. 03456060973 is the number. Am I right in suggesting that the apparent exodus of millionaires, which I do query a bit, there's a suggestion here that the millionaire exodus is equivalent to losing more than 500,000 average taxpayers?
It's worse than that, because if a millionaire...
But again, this is literally only from the study that was done by looking at people's LinkedIn accounts. They're all still citing this one fucking hack study with a stupid methodology that doesn't make any sense. Why are we still continuing with this? And like, even the fucking presenter is doing it now.
leaves, that millionaire, let's say they're paying $500,000 a year in taxes. Theoretically, yes, you could have 50 people paying 10 grand a year to make up for that. But the truth is that 50 people have 50 NHS requirements and they have the need for more services. A millionaire creates a lot of surplus tax, right? Because the government currently spends about £18,000 per man, woman and child in the country. 18,000.
And again, millionaire is a signifier of wealth, not income. Someone with £1 million income provides more in tax than somebody who works on minimum wage. But if they're not actually being paid in PAYE, they're being paid in stock options that they don't realise, then they're not actually paying more tax, are they?
£1,000. So you take a family of 4, right? You've got close to £80,000 that the government is spending on their behalf. Mm-hmm. Now, very few households generate £18,000 worth of tax per person. They might do it for one person, but very few households are doing it for mum, dad, and all the kids. Only a very, very small group of people create a surplus of tax revenue. When that surplus leaves, there is no amount of middle income people who can create the surplus.
And again, most of those people are high earners, not the super rich.
From one to another, Nick's in Mayfair. Hi, Nick.
Afternoon. Question for the panel. Do you think the government spends our money effectively?
All I know is that they used to spend 700 billion a year not that long ago. Now they spend 1.3 trillion a year. They've almost doubled the budget, but I haven't seen double the services. I haven't seen twice as many police officers on the street.
No, but you do have more old people. You literally have more elderly people that we're paying a lot of pensions for. And again, this is double in monetary terms, not in percentage terms. He's doing this nominal versus percentage fallacy that he does to try and make things seem more different than they are. When in percentage terms, the overall expenditure as a percentage of GDP isn't that much more than it used to be.
Streets. I know that we have something like more administrators working on any given day in a hospital than we have nurses and doctors. I know that the British Empire took over the entire world with less than 500,000 people working in civil servants, but now we have 6 million people working to run one little island. So,
again, just trying to speak like he knows what he's talking about, as if our world isn't far more complex now than it was during this era of the British Empire. Like, come on. Are we seriously taking these arguments seriously?
Take a look at Samsung. Samsung only has 250,000 people and is a global business. I can point to multiple massive global companies that run with 200,000 to 300,000 people that are doing bigger, more.
And again, he's just trying to compare governments to businesses, which is not a real comparison.
More effective things than our government. Our government's got 6 million people working in government. Do we need 6 million people? Do we need all those administrators, people dotting I's and crossing T's when AI can do most? PMG, you're on 600 to 700,000 a year. If you work at Ernst & Young, you're at 700,000 a year. Why would someone leave being a partner at KPMG running a team of 50 or 60 people? Why would they leave 600-700 grand a year with a pretty easy job to run the country for 140,000 a year? I can't.
Well, that's the whole point, right? Is that we shouldn't want these people to run the country because they're already in hock to corporate interests. I don't want rich wankers in charge of the country. I would like an actual workers' party representing working people, which obviously is not the Labour Party, traditionally the force that's supposed to put working people into government. Instead, it's got a bunch of spads and lawyers and PMC people rather than working people. Clement Attlee created the best country in the world at the time, in the post-war period, with a government full of printers and teachers and miners and lorry drivers. I would like them to run the country, please, because they know what real life is actually like, unlike Mr. Entrepreneur Accelerator here, or weirdo consultant wankers from KPMG, who basically already run the government because our governments literally subcontract out their own administration to consultants. Like far fewer consultants in any level of government at all, whether as politicians or as subcontractors. Please, no more consultants.
I don't see what they're spending it on. I'm in the exact same camp as that. I don't know what you would cut because I don't see police officers and I don't see enough doctors and nurses. I don't see it being spent. Where does it go?
Well, the fact that you're here being asked your opinion on economic spending by the government when you don't even know what's being spent on, shows you that you're not qualified to be here talking about these things on a very, very widely listened to radio show. It shows that you're a moron. It shows that you're so incredibly fucking ignorant of the important parts of government spending that you don't even know this when you've come on to talk about it. Jesus Christ.
Where does 1.3, where does 45% of our economy go? Like, I have no idea. There's potholes in the streets. Where is this money being spent? It blows my mind. I know that Ed Miliband runs around, playing ukuleles to beautiful green farms that he's going to cover in solar panels, right? So there's obviously money going in there, but where does this go? It's crazy.
And again, just going with this anti-net zero thing, as if energy abundance isn't the basis of how businesses can operate. Imagine trying to be an entrepreneur but paying sky-high energy costs. Like he continues telling people they need to be an entrepreneur. They need to be able to actually have affordable energy. Our energy is more expensive than everywhere else because we haven't decarbonised and we haven't built enough. And here you are opposing the government spending money on investing in revenue-generating assets that bring down the price of energy.
Craziness.
Well, there's a lot that needs to be, I think procurement in particular, defence procurement needs massively looking at again, because that just seems to be completely overblown. Glenn's in, is it Storrington, Glenn, in West Sussex?
Yes, good afternoon. Storrington, West Sussex.
Wonderful.
Good afternoon. A question for Daniel. In your opinion, is our dire economic performance as a consequence of having a government that is pretty much replete with people with no entrepreneurial experience?
We literally had a government of business wankers for 14 years, and they destroyed the country. The people in charge throughout the entirety of the Conservative Party administration were a bunch of people from the business sector, because that's who the Conservative Party have basically always had as their government ministers. And they screwed up the country. They ruined it. They destroyed it. The country is in the worst state it's ever been in because of continual Conservative governance, entirely directed by consultants and by business wankers. It's the first time in a very long time with this government that we have a bunch of PMC non-business owner type people. I'm not saying they're doing a great job. I'm not even saying they're doing a good job. They're just not doing as shit a job as all the business wankers were. Why we want entrepreneurs to run the country is an absolute mystery to me. An absolute mystery to me. And again, I will point back to the fact that in the post-war period, under Clement Attlee, it was a bunch of normal, everyday, working people who were in his government who created the best this society has ever been.
That have really lived their lives and their careers have been in the public sector, spending money, not creating wealth.
Well, I can tell you, if you're a business owner or an entrepreneur, you are in a full contact sport with reality at all times. You cannot be dodging reality. If you spend money and it doesn't work, you know about it. If you waste money, you know about it. It hurts you personally. It hurts your team. It hurts your budget. It hurts your ability to grow. It really does damage to you that month. And it's a horrible thing if you're in business. You have to face up to reality at all times. When people have worked in the public, in the government sector, they don't have to have that same accountability to reality. If they don't spend their budget, then they lose it the following year. So they're incentivized to spend more.
And then it goes back into the economy anyway. Again, it's demand-side policy, something that monetarists don't understand. And even then, the government has to spend very small amounts of money because it's been stripped back by austerity since 2010. And on top of this, they are democratically accountable. And to try and say that somehow business owners know if they've wasted money. I've spent time working in businesses. I've seen money get wasted. I know this isn't true. Like the amount of money that companies get to waste, especially corporate businesses that lay it on thick for their high-ranking employees. Think that unless you're really, really working on very thin margins as like a small business, you really actually notice that much if money gets wasted.
If they do something where they do a bad hire, it's easier to just ignore the fact that they've done a bad hire than to actually address the fact that they've done a bad hire. So they just hire someone new on top of the person that didn't work out. So there's all of those things that don't work. It does help to have people who are entrepreneurial in the government. But why is this,
Glenn, thank you, it's a good point, but it does seem to be a particular, at this moment in our collective history, it does seem to be a particularly European problem. This doesn't seem to be the same problem in Singapore or Malaysia or China, particularly, although it's a very different system. Japan, this doesn't seem to be the same issue of
I mean, it's definitely an issue in Japan. Japan have had stagnant growth for 30 years. They've literally had to run giant deficits to keep aggregate demand high enough to ensure that consumption is supported so that they don't have a recession. They've had stagnant growth for all this time. Like, it's definitely a Japanese problem. And of course, the thing that's kept their economy afloat has been government spending, not austerity.
A sclerotic state with people who don't really know what they're doing.
All of those places have embraced economic freedom, and they've said, hey, we do not want to be a nanny state. We want to let people get on with their...
China is a huge state. What are you talking about? Singapore owns huge amounts of like public housing. Now, of course, there are lots of other problems with Singapore in terms of the rights of a lot of the people who live there. But if you're looking at just like the amount that the government does, like the Singapore actually has a lot of state expenditure and a lot of state ownership in a way that our country doesn't. Like, people misapprehend the reality of Singapore's economy a lot of the time. It's not this kind of free market paradise that people like to claim that it is. Now, it's got a lot less business regulation, but there's a reasonable amount of state ownership, especially in the housing sector, that allows people to be mobile and to be able to spend their money.
Lives mostly. We want to run a pretty lean government. By the way, I'm not anti-tax. Most of these governments are about 30 to 35% of the economy. So that seems to be a pretty good, efficient...
He just doesn't know what he's talking about. The reason why these countries have a smaller level of government spending than the United Kingdom, because they only recently industrialised, unlike the UK and Western countries that industrialised before. Please understand some basic levels of economics and macroeconomics, Daniel, before you start spouting your mouth off on live radio. Again, Jeremy Hunt tried to do this when we debated on LBC as well. He tried to compare a Western economy that is developed to a developing economy in East Asia. These are not comparable.
To run things 30 to 30, about a third of the economy is government and 2/3 is business, and that seems to be about the most efficient way to do things. The other big issue is that the UK has no vision for what we are. We used to be the head office of Europe when we were inside the EU. We're now drifting towards being the fifth Nordic state, and we're becoming, Scandinavia 2.0.
What the hell is he smoking? Scandinavia, that thing where the government owns huge amounts of the industry in the country, much more than we do, haven't we sold off everything? We're not owning any more of the actual public realm. Like, we're not owning any more of the actual capital. How on earth are we anything similar to Scandinavia? What the hell are you talking about?
Do we want that? Is that what we want as a country? Do we want to be one of those socialist kind of leaning countries? Or
they're not even socialist, they're just social democracies. They're certainly more socialist than we are, right? They have more social ownership of capital, but they're not socialists in the strict sense of the word, i.e. the workers own the means of production. As in, all capital is socially owned. But they have higher living standards than we do. They have better economic growth than we do. People are happier than we are. Imagine if we were Scandinavia. I would love us to be Scandinavia. Unfortunately, we have far less state ownership, far worse workers' rights than these countries do, far less union coverage.
Some people would love to be a Nordic country. That's great. But you are going to have high taxes and you are going to have people leaving. The Nordic countries do have...
But they're not seeing people leave, though. That's the thing. They provide a very high standard of living for everybody. It's a lovely country with a functioning public realm where the streets are nice, the high streets are buzzing, and people have a good standard of living, so people don't fucking leave, Daniel. That is literally the point.
All of their millionaires, a lot of their millionaires leave. They lose money. They're very lucky in Norway that they've got the big wealth fund.
Yep.
But they are...
No, they're not lucky, they're smart. They didn't sell their most precious resource, i.e. the natural resource that the country owns, to private wankers. They kept it for the benefit of everybody. That is the problem here. It is the sell-off of natural resources and public assets to the private sector that is the problem. It is about social ownership of the capital, not high levels of tax. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.